every day. Just after 9 a.m. here on Times Radio, we discuss the biggest stories of the morning. Today, we are joined by the former Conservative Education Secretary, Baroness Nicky Morgan. Good morning, Nicky.
Good morning, both.
And the former Labour First Minister, Lord Jack McConnell. Good morning, Jack.
Good morning.
Yeah, thank you both for joining us. Here are some of the stories we've covered so far this morning on Times Radio Breakfast. The Immigration Minister, Mike Tapp, is still in his job this morning after writing an unauthorised opinion piece for The Times in which he criticised the Home Secretary's proposals for immigration reforms. Earlier, The Times Home Affairs editor Matt Dathan, who broke the story, explained what happened when he contacted the government to check whether the minister's comments aligned with official policy.
Well, I was quite surprised actually at the Downing Street's, the very different approach from Downing Street as opposed to the Home Secretary's team, who were furious, as we reported last night. Source close to the Home Secretary saying that they fully expected Mike Tapp to be sacked after the Home Secretary spoke to the Prime Minister. But Downing Street said, look, he stays in the job at the moment. The Prime Minister's still making up his mind because it's not clear whether he's breached the ministerial code. And we now expect actually that he may well stay in his job.
Meanwhile, Times political newsletter editor Stefan Boscia told us some MPs are unconvinced by Mike Tapp's decision to speak out, suggesting there may be an alternative motive.
It always looks too planned, though. I think I was speaking to one Burnham ally this week and said that the amount of hardcore Starmer loyalists, which Mike Tapp has been, who are now crawling to Burnham is quite sickening, they said, and they really think that people who are doing this will find themselves outside the town anyway.
Elsewhere this morning, planning permission has been applied to use 3 more former military bases in Oxfordshire, Suffolk and North Yorkshire to house asylum seekers, as the government promised to close all asylum hotels by 2029. The shadow Home Office Minister Matt Vickers told us he was unimpressed.
The reality is that under the last Conservative government, in the last year of the last Conservative government, the number of people in hotels had fallen by nearly 50%. If we'd carried on that trajectory, if we'd had another year, we wouldn't even have hotels now. The reality is this is all window dressing. Where you are putting people isn't solving the problem. The problem will be solved when we start detaining and deporting anybody who comes into the country illegally. If you break in, you shouldn't have the right to stay. That is how we solve this problem.
Also today, almost a third of adults who borrowed money from their parents have admitted that they lied at least once about what the money was for, according to a new survey by Compare the Market. Eliza Philby is money columnist for The Times and the author of Inheritocracy. It's time to talk about the bank of mum and dad.
It was very specific about what they were lying about. They weren't lying about the cost of childcare to their parents. They weren't lying about, the cost of living. They were lying about the luxuries in life. And I feel like it's a bit like lying to your doctor about how many alcohol units you consume a week. You want to give the best impression so that you get, the least sort of censure. And I think, it's a sort of conversational dance that we're beginning to see in families that is reflective of the fact that there's a real level of financial interdependency, but really dependency on the bank of mum and dad.
Well, all of this to discuss and much more. Get your views in by WhatsApping us 0333 003 2353. We're going to be discussing whether it actually matters if the King and Queen live in Buckingham Palace, unpacking the politics behind the bank of mum and dad. And first, though, we should start with the political standoff unfolding at Westminster after the Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood called for the Immigration Minister Mike Tapp to be sacked over the unauthorised article in which he suggested overseas care workers should be exempt from tougher immigration rules. Nicky, let's start with you. Number 10 right now is refusing to act, saying no decision's been made. That's after the Home Office said Mike Tapp was going to be sacked. It looks like total erosion of authority in many areas.
Yes, I mean, it looks like chaos, doesn't it? And it's extraordinary. Who knows what Mike Tapp's real motivations are? I suspect that actually the theory that he's trying to make a case to the next Prime Minister that he is an immigration minister worth retaining in their government is probably likely. But also, I mean, it's extraordinary really that the Home Secretary has allowed her call for him to be sacked to get out in public. Now who's put that out there? Again, we don't know. But I mean, when you're Secretary of State, unfortunately, your ministers, your junior ministers, will do things that you'd rather they didn't do, or say things and everything else. But then when your Secretary of State, you do things that upset number 10. I mean, that's kind of what happens, and everyone has to sort of agree to rub along. So I think there's clearly a lot of tension in the Home Office, a lot of tension in the heart of government at the moment because of the transition of power. And of course, it's coming ahead of the Asylum Immigration Bill being in the House of Commons next week. And so this is just a gift for the opposition. That's what they're going to talk about. They're going to say, look, even Home Office ministers can't agree on immigration policy. Why should the rest of the country accept what the government is doing on this? So it's really a bit of an unholy mess all around.
Yeah, Jack, there's been some sort of maybe well, actually, the word we heard from the government minister that we were speaking to earlier on the programme, that was Jake Richards, who he said is a friend of Mike Tapp. He's also an assistant whip, so his job is about instilling party discipline. And he didn't say, oh, that was the wrong thing to do. He said it was unwise. What do you think's going on there?
Well, I just think it's outrageous, to be honest. There's absolutely no way that I would have tolerated this when I was First Minister with Cabinet Ministers or junior ministers, and it shouldn't be tolerated now. Mr Tapp should have resigned before he published the article, and he should certainly be resigning now. If you don't want to support the government, then leave the government and argue your case from the backbenches. That's what John Healey and Al Cairns did just a couple of weeks ago, what others have done in recent weeks and months. So if he suddenly decided that he wants to be disloyal to Keir Starmer's government after the weeks in which he was one of the most loyal, I wonder why he's changed, then he should leave the government and make his case from the backbenches. It's very straightforward. And I was thinking back this morning, when I was Education Minister, I had a Liberal Democrat Deputy Minister. And never once did he even contemplate publicly exposing any sort of disagreement between him and I. This government cannot operate in this way, and I'm afraid it's a bit of a consequence of the delay in the transfer of power. Yeah. I cannot believe that the current Labour leadership and the Labour NEC have agreed to only open nominations for a new leader on the 8th of July. It's a ludicrous situation, and frankly, that process should have begun much more quickly. Which is
why we've got a climate like this, I think, where...
This is going to be 3 weeks worth.
Yeah, well, 3 weeks. I mean, Jack, just on that, I mean, this is a very unusual time, but Shabana Mahmood, you said Mike Tapp should be sacked. Shabana Mahmood, by all accounts, from what the Home Office have said...
I think he should do the decent thing and resign.
But he's not going to...
put Keir Starmer and Shabana in this position.
He's definitely not going to do that. He says, I won't be intimidated to drop my views, stay classy. What about the fact that Shabana Mahmood definitely believes that he should be fired, and the Prime Minister doesn't seem to?
Well, that's all just very awkward, and it is, as I say, a consequence of this delay in getting into a proper leadership contest and a transfer of power. And I think that the 2-week delay in opening the nominations has been a terrible mistake, and I think we'll see more of this over the coming week or two. I think Shabana should keep her calm. She's the classy one here. She should keep her calm. She should get on with her job, deal with her bill in the House of Commons next week, and she will retain the respect that everybody has for her already.
It wasn't very classy, was John, to actually go and brief that she'd asked the Prime Minister to sack him. It was unwise, even if he'd gone promptly ahead and sacked him, and actually turned out to be disastrous, because if he doesn't fire him now, she looks weak. But I just wanted to ask Jack, and it's a slightly cheeky question. We realised with Al Cairns and John Healey, they're both resigned. People sort of admired both of them, I think, but they clearly didn't like each other very much. And this is another situation where two people working on the same team, supposedly, on one of the most important issues for government, having a big fight with each other and don't like each other. Is it any surprise that the public think, the government can't organise the proverbial in a brewery when there's personal tensions are so dominant?
Well, I think one of the most important things for Andy Burnham, and I certainly do not speak for Andy, and I don't know what his approach will be to filling his cabinet, but I think one of the most important things for Andy is to create a ministerial team, not just a cabinet, but a ministerial team, where people are able to voice their opinion and contribute to the debate internally, but who then have proper discipline in the way that they handle themselves personally and politically as a member of the government. And unfortunately, that's, I think, when in years to come, when Keir reflects on his premiership, I think he will regret some of the inconsistencies in the way that he's dealt with these matters. The sacking of Louise Haigh, for example, in November 2024, for something that she had told him about that had happened well over a decade before and was not affecting her current job, was cruel and a completely over-the-top reaction. The number of young lads, as I call them, who've been allowed to get off with much greater breaches of current discipline over the course of the last year has just become a bit ridiculous, and this is just the latest example.
Well, Louise Haigh certainly got the last word on that one, didn't she? Nikki, I want to move you on to something else, something that may sound oddly familiar to you. The idea of using military sites to house thousands of asylum seekers. I swear there was a man called Keir Starmer thought this was a really bad idea, and the Labour government thought it was a bad idea, and yet today we're told that they're looking at 3 new sites and ramping up the other one. What do you make of this? Do you welcome the sort of turnaround, or?
Well, I think it's another example of the inconsistencies that Jack has just been speaking about, and it's why people are so frustrated, and it's why the Prime Minister has basically lost his job, and we're going to get a new Prime Minister. I think that the overall policy in terms of moving people from hotels, which in many cases have been deeply unsatisfactory, very often unpopular, obviously, with the local community, but they aren't like accommodation. To a military establishment, people have to be somewhere while their claims are processed. They need to be safe. They need to feel secure. And often these places are perhaps more isolated from communities where, as I say, there can be very differing views on welcoming or not welcoming people. But look, I mean, ultimately, the better thing, of course, would be for people's claims to be decided rapidly. There's always going to be people who will arrive and claim asylum, and actually that's where the UK has had a very good track record of giving people asylum, allowing people to rebuild their lives, and that's right. But then, of course, the agreement with France in terms of stopping people getting in the boats and or getting on the lorries in the first place is incredibly important. And you need all of those 3. Look, and we've just said, Jack's just said, I think Shabana Mahmood, I hope that she carries on as Home Secretary. I hope that the new Prime Minister doesn't actually want to move to something else, because I think that she is actually tackling a lot of the issues. And I listened to Matt Vickers, the shadow spokesman's interview, about an hour and a bit ago, and I think the Conservatives have got to find a way to own the immigration decisions they made, some which were made by Robert Jenrick, who's now in reform, when they were in government, but also to say, actually, we think the government's doing this right, but this wrong, and this is what was sport, and this is what we would do differently. And that's got to be the tone of the Conservative approach on this. And I hope that's what they'll do, as I say, when they discuss the immigration bill in the House of Commons, because I think there is some progress being made on issues that people really care about. And this move to military accommodation should be seen as something temporary while the numbers continue to come down because of the other policies it put in place.
Jack, there are no simple solutions here, are there? It sounds tough to move people from, nice hotels to a military barracks, essentially. But the locals nearby, who live nearby these barracks, they don't want people there either, do they?
Yeah, a lot of the language we use about this isn't really helpful for making well-informed decisions. Those who talk about nice hotels or even these flats of multiple occupation, these are not pleasant places to stay, and very disruptive in the local community, as we have seen over recent times. I think the military barracks option is a very good one. I've seen these operating in other countries, in Italy when the regime was in a better shape back a decade or so ago, and elsewhere. I think these sorts of facilities can be easily arranged in ways that allow people to be fed properly, to have somewhere to stay, but also to be processed through offices and the collection of evidence. So I think this is a good step, and it should really have all party support.
Lots for us to talk about, so we're going to pause our conversation right there. Still to come after we spent £369 million doing it up for them. Should the King and Queen live in Buckingham Palace? And why are so many adults borrowing money from the bank of mum and dad and then not telling the truth about where it goes? This is Times Radio Breakfast with Guto, Harri in for Callum McDonald today, and me, Rosie Wright, in association with Nationwide, a good way to bank. Does it matter where the monarch lives? King Charles and Queen Camilla won't live at Buckingham Palace, where £369 million worth of refurbishments will be completed next year. Once a year, we get sort of access and insight into the royal finances. That has just happened in the last 24 hours. Nikki, is it important where the King and Queen live?
To a certain extent, I suppose. I mean, look, Buckingham Palace is an amazing tourist attraction, and whenever you're, in London, I walk through Green Park a lot, and the view towards Buckingham Palace is always, it's a backdrop for lots of photos and everything else. I guess people kind of assume that the King and Queen are there, but I don't blame them for not wanting to live in something that is like an enormous old museum, and I suspect doesn't feel very homely. And they've got Clarence House just down the road, or the Mall as it's called, which is much more homely, and I suspect it feels like somewhere that they enjoy living. And of course, I think they spend a lot of time at Windsor Castle as well. So I think it's fine to have Buckingham Palace as a place for state banquets, for the garden parties, for things like investitures. It's where the Privy Council, if they're meeting in person, I think would be going. And if the royal family aren't going to use it lots, the King and Queen, then the better thing would be to open more of it up. People always want to have a look at these things, and make it even more of a sort of visitor attraction when it's not being used for official business. But yeah, I think it's probably just the reality of the situation. Lots of people have known that that's what's happening, that's the intention, and I guess the most recent publications have just kind of confirmed that for the rest of us.
Actually, we had a suggestion earlier as well to say, well, you could use Buckingham Palace to sort of stretch out some of that soft power and diplomacy, maybe to host a NATO summit or a G7
absolutely.
or whatever. And I think that idea went down quite well. Jack, the other thing that's happened is this is sort of a royal first. The King's revealed his tax bill in an effort to try and sort of improve transparency. So it showed he's paid more than £30 million worth of tax since he became king in 2022. I think in the year 2024, he had a tax bill of just shy of £13 million. He's in the top 100 taxpayers in Britain that year, which is, I think, where we would expect him to be. How important is it, you think, that we have more transparency about the bank accounts of the royal family?
Well, I think transparency in this area is really important, and it's not that long ago that there was total secrecy on this. And one of the big challenges that the former Queen had back in the late 80s, early 90s was around this issue. Well, there were lots of disruptions taking place in the family. There was also a massive issue about was the Queen paying tax or not, and then measures were agreed to take that forward. So, I mean, I think there's a bit of an opportunity here, and I would be surprised if the King was not amenable to this. I think in his reign, there should be a determined effort to review the financial relationship between the royal family and the state, and that would include the duchy and the crown estate and so on. And I think there's a need to look at all of that. I think our Prime Minister should at some point appoint a proper commission to look at this, with the agreement of the palace and the full cooperation of the palace. But I think before the next king moves into place, it would be very wise to review and change all these arrangements and get rid of some of the more ludicrous aspects where, for example, public spending is used to pay rents to the king, who then pays taxes. But I mean, I think these things could be reviewed and adapted for the modern age, with a good agreement across parties and with the family, and that would be healthy for everybody before there's a further change in the monarch, because that new monarch, if it is going to be Prince William as king, could be in place for a very long time.
Nikki, isn't there a risk here? We start by saying we should know what they pay in tax, then we should know, where they're going to live and what they spend on this. Before you know it, we will be demanding to know why they're flying the front of the plane, not the back, and why the son or the daughter, well, the son invariably gets the job, not the best person necessarily available to the state of the UK. Once you start taking away the mystique of the royal family, do you end up getting to a rational debate where the whole concept of the monarchy ends up being a bit sort of bizarre and eccentric?
Well, possibly, but I mean, I think there was an argument, wasn't there, way back in the 60s when the Queen let the cameras in to film the royal family. There was, I think, a huge hoo-ha at the time, and you're going to sort of, as you say, challenge the mystique of the royal family. And look, the ceiling didn't fall in, and we still have our monarchy. And I think, by and large, and I'm sure there'll be people listening who are going to text in and go, "I don't want a monarchy" and everything else. But I think, by and large, the British public have got sort of to a state of acceptance. Far better to have a monarchy than to have a political presidency, and so I think there's going to be there will be increased transparency, and I think it happens to lots of other people in public life, and I think that's just a sort of natural thing, particularly when the taxpayer is paying millions, whether it's for restoration of building or towards the sovereign grant, as it's now called, and I think that the better thing is the royals realise that there is going to be, those calls for increased transparency. And of course, the way to do it, or way to manage it, is to dramatically slim down, as the King has done, who is kind of considered to be an official royal. And so actually the transparency. So I think if people go off and say, well, yes, I may have been born into the family, but actually I'm going to go off and live my life, I want to effectively be treated as a private citizen, then fine, that's exactly how they should be treated. But there are going to be a few of them who are going to be in the front line, who are going to have that transparency, and I think that is understood by the working royals. And just for the record, I think the line of succession has been changed, so that actually it would now be the first child rather than the first son who becomes monarch. Those sorts of little things like that actually just show, I think, that a family, now whether they're going to be nudged into it, whether that's a decision, but I think the more they just keep moving forward with this transparency and changing and adapting to the modern world, the better it'll be for everybody.
Right, I'm going to execute a very cheesy segue, or indeed a handbrake turn here, because I don't think that Prince William has had to ask his dad for some money, but apparently 29% of us, a third of adults, who have borrowed money from their parents, have not been completely honest about what the money is for. That's basically, they say, we need help with the extension for the new baby, or we need help with the school fees. Obviously not if you're in the Labour Party, unless you were the leader, Tony Blair, of course, back in the day. But in truth, what they're doing is using it for that holiday, or to just make life a little easier. Jack, from either direction, either asking or giving, have you experienced any of this?
Well, I'm not sure this is a new phenomenon. I think there's always been the case that people who have parents who can help them financially, whether it's to start their first business or to get a privileged education, or to travel, to buy the first house or the first car, have always had that advantage in life. And one of the things that really saddens me about recent political debate in this country, and in particular in the Labour Party, I have to say, is that way back, when the last big change in government happened in the 1990s, this was a really live issue. How do you help those who don't have the bank of mum and dad to get a start in life, to get their first house, or to get their first to start their first business or whatever? And things like the child trust funds were imagined and created partly for this purpose. And I think there's a huge issue today in our government and society where government reinforces this by spending an awful lot of money on pensioners and very little money on young people. And I think, again, I don't want to give Andy Burnham too much advice this morning, but I would. But
you're telling him he should drop the pension triple lock.
Abolishing the pension lock and spending the money on incentives and starter initiatives for young people to give them the best possible start in life and equalise some of these inequalities of opportunity. You're never going to have full equality in our society but you can create better equality of opportunity. And I think that is that should be a major priority for a Labour government.
I think what this research found, though, that if you are one of the lucky few who could ask parents for help, or if you are parents who are able to help your children, how transparent is everyone being in that interaction about what you're going to spend the money on? Nikki, what do you think's happening here? Do you think these young people think, oh, my parents don't actually understand the real cost of going on holiday or what my life costs, so I'll ask for money and I'll just spend a little bit extra on something else?
Oh my God! I mean, this story brings together all the things that we as Brits, sort of slightly dread talking about. Finances, spending decisions, family dynamics. You name it. So look, I think there's definitely. There's an intergenerational difference, I suspect. Certainly, grandparents and grandchildren, but parents as well, probably, between what is deemed essential and what is deemed an indulgence, basically. But actually makes life just a little more, bearable for whatever it is. And I haven't done it. I seem to be the one doling out the cash to members of my family. It means I'm going to go and ask them now exactly what they are spending it on.
Well, is it borrowed or given? Because that's also different.
It's given. I've got as somebody said, I've got a very expensive 18-year-old cost centre in my house at the moment. So, and he went to his leavers ball last night, and we've just had the drinks bill in. So he had a great night. I think it is a difference of opinion of what people want to spend it on. I mean, Jack's right. All the points about there's lots of people for whom they can't ask their parents, obviously, for anything. I think probably parents and grandparents, there is a bit of indulgence, which is basic. I'm going to give you the money, and I'm not going to be too prescriptive about exactly where it goes. So, and I guess that, as I say, is essential really for family dynamics to continue to operate healthily.
Nikki, thank you very much. Nikki Morgan and Jack, thank you very much. Jack McConnell, the former Labour First Minister of Scotland, Nikki Morgan, the former Conservative Education Secretary. It's been a pleasure. Guto, do you recognise any of those awkward dynamics?
A little bit. I don't think I ever asked for any money. My aunt gave me money to pay for my postgrad. So it was a very specific thing. It was for the fees for a postgrad in journalism, and I paid her back, within 2 or 3 years of getting a job. And that's about it, I think.
And my grandparents helped me pay for university, and they did that for my sisters as well. And but that was given for a very specific purpose. Yeah. So I think that makes it much easier.
It is awkward if and then you're obliged to pretend that you are being very parsimonious in every other walk of life, which is not true, nor should it be. But I think everybody's forced into some sort of role play in these situations.
I think the challenge would be if you said, look, we're £20,000 short of a deposit that we can't afford for this house. Could you loan that to us? And then your behaviour would be scrutinised in a different way, wouldn't it? Because then you'd be like, well, why are you going on that holiday? Yeah. Maybe you didn't need to borrow quite so much.